Mira Business FM, the morning drive, discussing what is more and more a critical conversation at the intersection of, I guess, social sentiment and corporate risk. Now, across markets this year, cancel culture has evolved from kind of a buzzword, maybe something we don't take as seriously as we might, but it is a real tangible business threat, from things like lost sponsorships, halted productions, to costly legal battles over contracts, and also reputational losses as well, particularly in markets like the United States or perhaps South Korea, where online backlash can escalate and divide even more in just hours. So who do you speak to for expertise on reputational risk and how companies can navigate a landscape where public outrage and brand exposure are increasingly linked? Edward Barnfield is the managing partner at the public relations consultancy firm Wallis, and he's here to consider what cancel culture means for brands, for investors, and global business strategy going forward. Edward, welcome, first of all.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Very nice to see you. Can we, first of all, define cancel culture? I have Googled this. I'm not trying to test you, but let's just put it into context, first of all.
So there are foundations and behaviors that have been with us for decades, even centuries. Yep. And cancel culture kind of comes up as a term in the US around about a decade ago, where it is online communities call out, it was also called call out culture, behavior or opinions they feel are beyond the pale, and try and organize a response to it. So the new element is very much the social media element that enables these kind of communities to form without central organization and allow the algorithm to drive the response. And what we've seen really over the last decade is it's a tool that's been used by people across all ends of the political spectrum, across different parts of culture. It's focused very heavily on celebrities, on calling out particular celebrities, and this kind of strange parasocial relationship that a lot of people have with celebrities, where their bad behavior or their failed marriages suddenly becomes something that not only do I have an opinion on, I want there to be a consequence. And it's expanded into a general reaction where people have an emotional response to something that's happened, wanting to see consequences. So we've seen this shift from cancel culture to consequence culture. Now, you can argue culturally there's been a move away from it. People say, well, we're less woke than we were now. We've changed. There's a change in the zeitgeist. But actually, the behavior continues and has escalated. There's a really interesting report out by Shutterstock called the Creative Impact Report last year, and it says 66% of brands have been the target of cancel or boycott campaigns over the last year. 2/3, 66. That's an incredibly high volume compared to original behavior around boycotts. And it tells you a little bit about how the velocity of these campaigns has accelerated, the speed with which these kind of information spreads and demands a response, and the challenges that brands face in avoiding these issues becoming crises.
It's nothing new. There's nothing new in, I guess, holding people in prominent positions to account. You're right. It really does come from celebrities. But look, I was walking down a London street 30 odd years ago, and there was an activist table talking about animal testing. And as a consequence of that, I haven't bought a particular razor brand since then, because I feel as though I shouldn't be contributing to the treatment of animals. So there's nothing new in this, and we've gone after people like Ellen DeGeneres, for example, for her. There was a massive backlash over allegations of the work environment, I think, on her show, the Mute R. Kelly movement, after allegations of abuse for many years. Things like that. So it's there, but it's now extending into, there are examples of brand and company cancellations. Goya Foods in the US, for example, or the MyPillow CEO. I think we're all very aware of Mike Lindell being cancelled, as it were, in 2021. He was supporting election fraud campaigns. Broadly speaking, with that in mind, what does cancel culture mean now that it extends more for companies and for brands? We're moving, we've kind of graduated past celebrities almost.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's worth saying the tactics aren't new at all. I mean, boycotts are a very old, and consumer boycotts are a very old technique.
Yeah.
The word boycott comes from Charles Boycott, who's a land agent in Ireland in the 1880s, who suffered a campaign of social ostracization, where local people said, we will not sell to him.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, this boycott, the name, ironically, of boycott comes from the target of the first boycott campaign, the victim, if you like. Became a huge scandal in Victorian society. Troops were sent to try and resolve it. But it was seen as a very successful tactic, and it runs through activism, throughout the 20th and 21st century. Boycotting countries, particular products, not buying from South Africa during the apartheid years. So the tactic's not new. I think what cancel culture has added to the mix is partly the online community response and organization. So the actual people who are driving it are often anonymous, often decentralized. There's no central organization. It is very diffuse in that if you type most celebrities' name into a search engine these days, there will be some scandal associated with their name. Most brands, there will be at least one or two people saying bad things about them. And what's different is when it collides with the cultural zeitgeist, when your company becomes a symbol for something bigger, that's when it becomes a brand crisis. If people feel very strongly about Gaza 2 years ago, they couldn't actively do much directly on the situation, but they could boycott consumer brands and restaurant brands that were associated with it, and we saw those brands having to react, and it had a material impact on their bottom line. Yeah. So this sense of a personal response, an angry online response, becoming something broader and being the internet and social media, and now AI being an accelerant, is the real difference, is the real interesting point with cancel culture. There's also, I think, very little social pressure on people not to do it. Most people will have one or two brands they do not shop with, they do not associate with, one or two celebrities they will never buy the records of. It's often almost a generational thing because they remember that person from 10 years ago when the scandal broke, and then their kids don't have that emotional baggage. And that's very normal. That's a very normal part of our dialogue. It didn't used to be. It used to be you were a political activist or a political person if you had products that you boycotted, and not everyone believed in that or thought that was a fair tactic. But it's become part of the culture far more now. And so we see people from the left, from the right, geographically all around the world, calling for things to be cancelled and having this emotional reaction.
So there's a real financial risk from this for companies. And as you said there, it actually really can have an impact on the bottom line. So how should corporate boards, executive teams be thinking differently about reputational risk now, as opposed to, just a couple of years ago?
Well, I think the really interesting thing, and this is from someone who's a communication professional, it's gone from being a communications issue to a velocity risk issue. And what I mean by that is how you used to handle reputational issues. It would be your comms team and the lawyers who dealt with it, and it would be seen as a communication issue. And how we dealt with it was through very traditional communication tools. There would be a company statement, which would be carefully crafted by the lawyers and by the comms team, and then vetted by the lawyers. There would be, you would put that on your website. You would do media outreach. You would base your response on media cycles. Old heads in communications 20 years ago used to tell me, you just need to get to the weekend. You get through Friday and you hit the weekend, the story will change. People will forget. They'll pick up on something else. All of that has changed now. Legacy media is not as important. People are finding information far more from online communities who they believe far more. Your response has to be much quicker. You have to split it across multiple platforms. You have to have little micro versions for TikTok, and you have to have a video that you can put out quickly of showing awareness. The speed is much quicker, and actually the impact is much quicker because we're living in this very hypercharged, velocity-driven society, community. Your partners and your suppliers and your retailers will act often before you do if you're not moving quickly. So I think what companies need to be doing is, the best way to avoid a crisis is preempting, being aware, looking at how narratives are changing online, monitoring conversations around your brand, but looking at narrative rather than keywords, making sure you have the tools in place to move quickly, making sure that your CEO is comfortable in responding very quickly with what you know, and then investigating slowly to make sure you actually know the truth of the situation. Because the most damaging thing in the world is having to retract or edit what you said historically. So the speed has changed, and the fact that I think companies recognize now that reputation management is core business. It's a revenue cash flow issue across a whole host of industries, and you need to be preempting not just the audiences who are critical of you. You need to make sure that your employees are coming along with you. You need to make sure that your partners are with you. You need to make sure that you're putting out messaging that the regulator is comfortable with. Because it's when these things jump from individual angry audience communities online and become institutional, that's when you really face a crisis.
Okay, so in my head, I'm trying to keep up with what's going on in the world across social media. I can't do it. So it means that we've got these highly reactive online communities, and they are disparate. Like, how do you follow them? But you need to have, it's almost like you need an early warning system.
Well, I think the early warning systems are there. I mean, more and more companies are deploying fairly sophisticated tools to manage online chatter. They're certainly deploying sophisticated tools to sort of dark monitoring, where they're looking at shifts in search patterns online, changes in local language sentiments, anything that they can control, they look into. And then also, I think you have frontline feedback loops. It's not, you can weather a cancel situation if there is an angry online community who's not really your customer base. The reality is there are always people out there who are angry about something. You're likely to be a target.
Sure.
When it crosses into your customer base, when people are walking into your shops and saying, hey, I hear you guys support animal testing, or I hear this product is dangerous for children, you need to have the feedback loops in place so that the people who work with your customers and your suppliers are telling you this is becoming an issue on the front line. And so all of those kind of processes can be put in place fairly easily, and technology is making, in many cases, easier for us to monitor and track this. But obviously, the challenge is, technology is making it easier to spread misinformation quickly, to do fake videos, deep fake videos, and circulate them. So it's a constant kind of arms race and arms battle. The core is, are you ready to move quickly, and do you know what environment you're working with? I mean, I think the other thing, and the reason it's a useful conversation for companies, is you need to understand what your core values are, genuinely what your core values are, and make sure that your operations are aligned with that. Because it's the gap between the two that blows up in people's faces. And I think, a lot of companies have kind of dabbled, and we're very sustainably focused. Here's our green page. We're all about diversity. Here's our recruitment page. You have to ask, well, is this core to what we do? Are we actually living up to these values? Because when people catch you in the difference between what you've said and what you do, that's really what adds fuel to the fire of these controversies. And that's when the cancel stuff catches, because your employees are like, well, we don't really live up to our values. I'm on a daily basis, I see how we actually operate.
Okay.
And that catch means your internal audiences and your stakeholders are already predisposed when the external, the angry group of activists start calling you out.
Okay, so say what you mean, do what you say, tell the truth, because it's easier to remember that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think the core of managing any situation is saying what you do know, admitting what you don't know, and acknowledging you will close that gap as quickly as possible.
Right.
You can't. There is a slightly unrealistic expectation, some of these crises, where a CEO of a global 500 company will be asked, how could you not know what was going on in your factory in Bangkok? And the honest answer is, well, we have operations in 125 countries. I rely on my people in those markets, but I'm not physically there. It's not possible. But you can acknowledge. You can say, here are the systems we have in place. These are the expectations we make of our different markets. We're very clear on what we want from people. And I'm going to look specifically at these allegations, and we'll let you know the outcome as soon as we can. So that kind of transparency and commitment to living to your values helps companies get through these kind of flashpoint situations.
So holding your hands up and saying, okay, we could be better, and I will ensure that we will strive to be better.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you want to avoid too defensive language because that can exacerbate.
So
and
don't
again,
hold your hands up. Like
I wouldn't hold your hands up.
Okay, so don't, right. Oh, just open hands or something?
Open hands.
Open hands, right.
Easy body language, relaxed body language. But I think acknowledging a willingness to investigate, acknowledging a willingness to change if change is necessary, but also saying, well, look at what we do on a day-to-day basis in this company. Look at what we add to people's lives. And we feel we're doing a good job, but there's improvement we all could make.
How do you assess as a company or as a brand whether a controversy, because as you say, people bite back all the time, don't they? We're all keyboard warriors to one extent or another, I guess. How do you assess whether a controversy is a short-term issue, it's not really going to have a great effect on reputation, or could actually snowball into a long-term threat to a brand?
I think we talk about this a lot in communications, and it's the difference, I think, between issues management and crisis management. Issues are the things you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Crises are the things that have a long-term, possibly catastrophic impact on your bottom line and on your business. There are a few, in my view, obvious warning signs. One is when it shifts from audiences to institutions, you've got a crisis on your hands, and that's when the regulator gets involved, or a politician starts calling for an investigation, or your investors indicate they're pulling back, or your retailers start pulling your product from the shelf because they don't want to be associated with you. Sure. So that's the first obvious warning sign. I think in addition, any time that your internal stakeholders are swayed towards these negative audiences, if you have employee issues already, and they feel that their voice is being better represented by the people who are agitating against you, then that's another warning sign that it could be a crisis because it will pull in other audiences and so forth. And I think the third is when if your crisis becomes a symbol of something bigger. If your company is seen as a great example in the US at the moment is around ICE and immigration enforcement. Again, that's produced a very strong emotional reaction among communities. There's not a lot people can do if they're not in the areas where ICE are specifically against ICE. But what they can do is boycott the hotel chains who are putting them up, or the software chains who are providing their software. So you have these issues, these geopolitical issues or local political issues. You become a symbol of that. The chances are there is a long-term crisis element. And I think the final point is if the issue relates to something core to your business, and perceptions are changing, and you are reinforcing the negative perception. So if you're an airline manufacturer who is associated with safety issues, that is a long-term crisis issue which will shift your reputation and reduce your effectiveness as a business. So when it cuts to the core of what you do, and safety is a big one for car manufacturers, for food products, for medications, that's when you absolutely need to put all effort into resolving it as quickly as possible, cutting it off and changing the conversation and focusing on your safety profile.
The final question I want to ask you is about resolving things, about resolution, and whether or not, from a risk management perspective, if it does get to that point where you do need to hold your hands out openly, should you engage with to what extent should you engage with critics? Because it's very easy to fire off an angry response now, just to an Instagram post or to use a hashtag, but it's situation relevant, I suppose. But how much should you engage with a keyboard warrior, for example?
It's a great question, and I think companies often make the mistake of confusing volume with scale. So there is a permanently angry minority online on almost every issue. There are people who and if you think about the function of social media, it is about driving an emotional response, and anger and fear are the easiest responses to generate and sustain. So my view and my advice to clients typically is you need to engage with the audiences who matter to your business in your long term. If your customers are aggrieved on these issues, then they're the people you need to be speaking to and going back. The keyboard warrior, where is the long-term value in engaging that person? You cannot change their opinion or turn them into an advocate without a huge amount of effort and a fundamental change in their relationship, in their personality almost. And you're constantly talking on the negatives. You know, a great example is there are animal entertainments here in the UAE. You can see penguins, you can see dolphins, you can go to safari parks. There are people who believe animals shouldn't be in cages. That's their fundamental belief. I'm not sure it makes sense for the institutions to engage those people because it's a fundamental disagreement. You know, there is no common ground to be had. And there are a lot of people who are interested in animal welfare who will be interested in learning about the work you're doing to not only preserve these species, but to encourage breeding programs and so forth. So engaging that audience you have common ground with and a relationship with is far more fruitful in the long run and will be far more fruitful in a crisis situation than engaging the smaller minority of people who don't believe it. I think you can say, this is your belief, I respect it, I respect your capacity to have it, but an ongoing conversation won't get you anywhere. You know, you fundamentally disagree on the basics. So my view is, you know, it's always about, well, who are the audiences I already have a relationship with who are important to me, who I need to keep engaging, and who are the minority of people for whom the anger and the discussion is the purpose. You know, the heat and the fury is the purpose of what they're doing. And I think companies all too often make the mistake of going to the angriest, bitterest person rather than saying, well, wait a minute, what about we have 10% who love our product. We have 10% who hate our product, but what are we doing for the 80% in the middle who can be swayed either way? That, I think, is where your focus needs to be.
It's fascinating. It really is. Cancel culture this morning. I think we've scratched the surface at least.
Yeah, there's always more.
There's probably a lot more to talk about. Edward Barnfield is managing partner at the public relations consultancy Wallis. Appreciate you coming in. Thank you.
My pleasure. Great to see you all.
Good
Thank
to see
you.
It's Mira Business FM.